how in the world do we approach ultra clear water? Hi there, welcome to the Bass Fishing Life. I'm your host, Steve Rogers. Before the video gets going, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and punch that notification bell. And also don't forget to check out our new blog site, thebassfishinglife.com. We have new content on there 3 times a week as well. Thank you so very much. Well, a lot of times after that ice comes out, we've got this early spring, late winter, and before the heavy rains kick in, anglers will get to the lake and they're sometimes in shock at how clear that water can be. It's almost, if you're not used to it, it's kind of a blessing and also a curse. It's a blessing because you can see a lot of what's going on. You may spy a lot of fish, see a lot of fish, but it's a curse because those fish have already seen you and the bite can be super tough. Well, we're going to be talking about clear water fishing today, not only how it applies in the early spring, but also if you're ever out on new lakes or rivers and you've got ultra clear water in the summer and the fall as well. So that's what we're going to be going into detail with. The first thing to keep in mind is you don't want to get pulled into that trap of sight fishing for those cruisers that you see up there along the shoreline in that ultra clear water. By the time you see them, 99% of the time they've already been alerted to your presence. And you can still catch a few here and there, but instead of focusing on those fish up shallow in that ultra clear water where you can see, you need to look at it as a good sign that you found an area where these fish like to be using. So don't necessarily waste your whole day trying to catch some cruiser going back and forth, but figure out, you know what? There's something in this spot that bass like, and there's probably more than one here. So that's the first trap to avoid in ultra clear water, is know that most likely they have seen you first and they're going to be very difficult to catch. You can catch them, but they're going to be really hard. And oftentimes the first thing that they do if you spook one is, where do they go? Deeper water. So that is the key to figuring out how to fish ultra clear water. Now on my home lake here, which it's a reclaimed strip mine lake, so it is very clear. It's not unusual to see 15 feet or 20 feet down to the bottom. What I always tell people that come out here and fish for the first time and they get kind of in a panic about how clear the water is I say, let's focus on that depth zone that is just out of our sight. So if we can see our lure down there at 15 feet and then it kind of drops into the shadows, well, that's where we're going to start to focus, just out of sight. Those bigger, better fish, I can't tell you how many times when I start to retrieve the bait and I know I can't see my lure anymore, I'm down in that target depth zone. That is just a really great strategy to employ. The bigger predators, the better fish, they want to be in areas where they cannot be seen. So that's the first thing that we're going to think about. Now I should probably say, if you happen to fish a great big reservoir, so that's your home water, some big huge reservoir like a Lake of the Ozarks, ultra clear water is usually something that you can avoid if you don't like to fish it, because you can start to run up to the mid-lake or maybe up into the river arms and look specifically for the color of water that you prefer. So if you don't like clear water and you live on a reservoir, just go ahead and run up those river arms until you get the clarity level that you feel most comfortable with. But there are a lot of lakes in this country, especially up north, where the whole lake is just really clear and there's no place that you can run to avoid it. Okay, so we've talked about the first thing that we're going to do is focus on that depth zone where we can no longer see our lure. And the second thing that we're going to do is make ultra long casts. When you're on a super clear lake, ultra long casts are your friend. So make sure that you set up your reels. If you're using a bait caster, loosen that spool tension up just a bit, back the braking system off just a bit so you can get a longer cast. And I also like to use lighter line, not only because it is less visible to the fish in that really clear water, but it also is more supple and it casts a lot farther as well. To help with those ultra long casts, I like to use certain types of lures that can handle fighting through the wind. For example, just the other day, it was very windy and I was out throwing lipless crankbaits. That is very similar to throwing a potato chip in the wind. You can throw it straight this way and all of a sudden it'll cast, woo, it'll just catch that wind to go way off to the side. So focus on lures that have more of a bulky profile. Deep diving crankbaits obviously throw very well. I'm really particular to soft jerk baits, the paddle tails or the straight tails that have a lot of salt in them. You can just cast those a country mile. So make sure that you pick your lures or select lures that will help you make those really long casts, because long casts are your friend, especially if there's no cloud cover and there's no wind. You're gonna have to make super long casts. And that leads me to my next point. If you're fishing an ultra clear lake and all of a sudden the wind picks up and the cloud cover picks up, that is a huge plus for you, especially that wind. Even on sunny days, if you've got some chop on the water, that means you're gonna be able to get closer to your targets and the fish have a more difficult time seeing you. So use those things to your advantage if you can. A lot of anglers avoid the wind at all costs, but when you're dealing with that ultra clear water, the wind is definitely your friend. The last thing that I want you to look for when you're fishing ultra clear water is most of the time those lakes and rivers, because the water is clear, is going to have a really healthy stand of some sort of vegetation. Use that vegetation to your advantage. Those bass are going to bury up in that thick cover, those thick weed lines, those isolated spots. Now, if you are on a clear reservoir where they draw it up and down quite a bit, odds are you're not going to have some healthy vegetation, so you are going to have to use depth, just like we talked at the beginning of the video. Back off that bank and get deeper where your lure is out of sight. But if you have a lot of vegetation, you know that those bass are going to be using it to hide, to get in the shade, and also it keeps them from being seen as well. So definitely look for the thickest vegetation that you can find, and that'll guarantee there's going to be bass there. And the last part of this ultra clear water equation is I find that if I match the forage base as accurately as possible, it definitely helps. Just for a simple example, here in my home lake that is super clear, there's no shad, there's lots and lots of bluegills as far as a forage base. When I throw a white swim jig with a white trailer, I still catch fish. But when I change that swim jig and trailer to mimic and match the bluegill, the forage base in this really clear water, it way outfishes the white one. Now, if I go to another lake that has a healthy population of threadfin shad or even alewives or something like that in clear water, well, that white's probably going to be an okay choice. So make sure that you match that as close as possible. Even with the soft jerk baits, on the last video we talked about throwing a paddle-tailed jerk bait. A lot of places people throw the whites or the silvers or the smoke gray colors. I try to pick paddle tails that have got a little bit of color to them to match that bluegill forage that we have here on this home lake. Same goes with the crawfish. If you're lucky enough to get to a lake the day before, put a small little crawfish trap out or go and flip some rocks around the boat ramp and see which color pattern that they are actually in. Are they more brown? Are they green? Are they dark green? A lighter green? The more accurately you can match the forage in clear water, the better off you're going to be. And don't be afraid to play with a little bit of color change, okay? Put a little more chartreuse in there if you got a lot of bluegills in the lake, or if you're focusing on crawdad forage, mix it up with different shades of brown or different shades of green. fine-tuning the color in clear water can have a huge impact. And if you've got multiple people in the boat, that is a great time to experiment with color, so take advantage of it until you really get it dialed in. Well, I hope that these ultra clear water tips help you out. Don't let it intimidate you if you're not used to it. Just go ahead and back off, fish a little bit deeper, look for the heaviest cover, and just don't get hung up when you see those, you know, that 2-pounder cruising down the shoreline. They're super hard to go ahead and catch those. So focus on those fish that are just out of sight. Hey, don't forget to go out and encourage someone today, because you never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.